Hi guys, what's up? Welcome to this live stream in which I will be answering your doubts about UpHive. I am your host, my name is Jorge Rangel. Nice to meet you. You didn't see me before. And let's get started. I did have a question for this live stream. Remember, you can subscribe to the live streams via Luma. We have links to that. So you register there. You can ask me some questions about UpHive. So let's check that out. Give me a moment. I am opening that up. Give me a moment, please. Okay, they are here. There you go. Okay, I had one question. I have one question. Let me check it out. Okay, it's not actually a, a question. It's actually just the registration. I thought it was a question because I get the notification, but no, it's not a question. So let's get started then with these tutorials. Remember, these tutorials are to learn how to develop applications in UpHive. Is not to buy in UpHive or to create a new template. Is to create applications from scratch, not to buy templates. Sorry, it's for creation of applications from scratch. Given that I do not have any questions in my list that is given to me before these lives, I am going to answer questions from the people in Spanish, yeah, and I'm going to be translating them to English because I think that will be a little bit more helpful that if I only do the live stream, I only explain things that occurred to me before the live stream. Sorry. So let's get started with that. I am closing the windows in my computer so I can show you the editor. Give me a moment. Okay. Give me a moment, please. I'm trying to present my screen. There you go. You can see it. I can see that here that we are now seeing my screen. Okay, this is the home page. Let's start by creating an example. There are a lot of questions that are posted in UpHive in Spanish, and I'm going to be answering something that is very common when you are developing an application. In UpHive, the default database that you are using is the real-time database from Firebase. You can Google that right here, real-time database from Firebase. That is one type of database in Firebase. There is another one that is actually the one that they use the most, which is called Firestore. But no, we use real-time database. Real-time database is a non-SQL, non-relational database. What does that mean? That you have to model your data based on what you are showing on the screen, not based on the business logic. If that doesn't make sense to you, is because you haven't read or hear about databases. So today I'm going to be explaining a little bit about how Firebase real-time database works in the context of UpHive and how you can use it. So it's going to be a little bit more theory in this one. It's not going to be a lot of practice, but you can access the Firebase database here, and we provide you with something of a scheme. Firebase real-time database doesn't have a scheme per se, but we offer you the options to create one, so you can guide the process of querying from Firebase. So let's open here a diagram. Draw diagrams.net, sorry. Remember, a lot of Spanish is going to get out of my mouth because I'm not used to live stream in English, but I'm going to get better, don't worry about it. So I'm going to be using this tool right here, which is called diagram.draw.io, and I'm going to be using it to illustrate how Firebase real-time database works in the context of any application, right? Each one of these rectangles is going to represent an entity in my application or in my project or in my software product. I guess is the correct word. So for example, one is going to be the phone from client. For example, when you are developing an application, the application is going to ultimately run in the client. The client is what we call the phone normally on the user, or the browser if it is accessing your application from the browser. Remember, in AppHive you can do applications in the browser, so it's the same. The phone or the browser or the web application is going to be called the client. Okay. Now, when you are going to store data and are going to retrieve data from the database, you are going to be using real-time database for the most part. You can of course connect other databases with AppHive, but in this example that's not the case. But just keep in mind you can do it. For example, if you have an existing SQL database, you can connect your AppHive project with that without any problem. Okay. So let's continue. Here there is another entity. This one is called Firebase. Sorry, Firebase database, real-time database. And this one is the one from Firebase directly. And here there is another one, yet another entity. This one is going to be called Cloud Functions. AppHive lets you create functions that will run on cloud instead of on the client. These functions are ultimately put in the service called Cloud Functions from Firebase. Yeah. So when you are developing your applications, if you don't already know, when you are developing applications, you have to put some code on the client, some code on the server. There is a concept called serverless applications in which you only write the logic on the client, but that kind of applications are only useful when you are doing something very simple. When you are doing something that requires a lot of processes, a lot of parts are moving when you are doing the applications. For example, when you are paying for something, if you put all the processes on your client here on the phone, you are at the mercy of that phone. You are at the mercy of the client not closing your application midway through the process, or the client not, I don't know, throwing the phone on the toilet in the middle of the process. Because if that happens and the process is run on this phone right here, the middle of that process is not going to be completed. And if that process happens to be a payment process, maybe you will charge the customer and not give him the product that you are offering in your application. Or the other way around, you maybe give the user the product and do not charge it. Okay, so you need this environment right here, the cloud functions. You need this one because if the client only requests to the cloud functions to start the process, and you give the cloud function the start variables, and the cloud functions does all the process, now the client doesn't have to be running in order for the process to complete. Okay, you can just say, okay, buy this item, and cloud functions will buy this item. And if the phone in the middle of this process just explodes because it instantly combusts or something, it doesn't matter, because the cloud function is the one that is processing your information, and at the end it will of course tell the phone from the client that the process is complete. But the good part about this is that the phone is not going to be answering in our hypothetical example, because the phone is already destroyed, but the process is completed, and all the information is complete, and all the information is completely updated. Nothing is missing. So the client, when the client buys another phone and reinstalls the application and relogs in your application, all the informations will be there and the charge will be made. Okay, that is one concept that I want to be illustrated a little bit further into this video, but I want you to keep that in mind, because this one right here is a very common way to do applications. You can do everything on the client, everything that you can do on the server. Not everything. Okay, sorry, not everything, but for the most part, all the logic that you are running on the server, you can run it on the client. And each one of these platforms has trade-offs. For example, if you run something on the cloud, Firebase is going to charge you for that because you are using their servers. Okay. If you run it on the phone of the client, you are not going to pay for that because the user is lending you some of the processing power of their phone to run your application. But the drawback is that you don't have any control over what is run on the client. That is key, because there is another part of this that you have to take into account when you are building applications, which is security. You can't have any of the credentials that you use to connect with third parties in your client. You have to have them in an environment that is secure to you, which is usually your server. In this case, Cloud Functions. Okay. The Firebase real-time database was designed to run directly with the client. Let me be clear on that. For example, if your client wants to list the restaurants that are available in an application that is for delivery, you can do that directly from Firebase. You can say from the client, hey, Firebase, okay, the error is the other way around, sorry. You can say to Firebase, hey, Firebase, give me the restaurants, okay? You can do that without any problem. Give me restaurants. And when these instructions goes through Firebase, Firebase has a mechanisms to check if this user in particular can query the information that is being requested. I'm going to talk about it in the future, of course, and the mechanism is called security rules from Firebase. We are going to be toying with that as well in the future. For now, you have to know that the mechanism is there, because if there was no mechanism for Firebase to check before sending you the information or before committing any changes to the database, that will be a lot more insecure, because this client right here could have the potential to alter your database, your Firebase database, without the user having the permissions to do so. Okay, so when you request something for Firebase, first it checks if you actually have the permission to do that, and if you do, it returns the information to you. Here you go. If you get this data, you can show in the interface of the user a list or something like that with information from the database. That's the idea. The idea is that you don't have to go through your server in order to get the information from the database. That, in theory, makes things a little bit more faster. That's the idea when they designed Firebase. The idea was that you don't have to pass from the server to the database, because in some applications, in the majority, in fact, of the applications, when you are using a database, it doesn't matter if it is real-time database or any other database. The job of the database is very simple. The job is store the information and responds with the information that the users query. That's what a query is. A query is a request to a database for some specific information. In this case, for example, we are telling the database, give me the restaurants. Which restaurant doesn't matter, is an example, but that's the idea. Any other database does exactly the same. You give them information, they store it, and you can query that information from the database. In a traditional application, which is almost every application that you use, doesn't matter if it's a web application or a mobile application, you get from the client to a server. This server usually is used only for this application or this project in particular. It could have a lot of different services, but doesn't matter right now. You have a server that responds to the queries from the user, and this server is the one that actually gets the query done to the database. So the server checks out. Remember this one? I'm going to delete it so it is a little bit more clear. So in a traditional architecture, when you are on your client application, the client application tells the server, get me the restaurants. And in the server right here, the server the server first checked if this user in particular, in this device in particular, has the right to ask for these particular restaurants. If that checks out, then the server goes and query restaurants on the database, Yeah, the database says, oh, sure, dude, you are the server from this application. Usually that means that the server has complete access to the database. That's the reason that in Firebase real-time database, when you are using the admin SDK, which is meant to run only on the server, that is the reason the admin SDK has complete access to the database. And in fact, Firebase real-time database ignores any security rules that you have when you are doing the queries from the admin SDK. That is the reason, because it's supposed to run in the server. The admin SDK from Firebase runs on the server, so it doesn't need to check the rules, because it implies, or it how do you say it? Because the admin SDK from Firebase assumes that you are checking if the user actually has actually has the access to this information, right? So the database doesn't check the Firebase rules here is because you are doing the query from the admin SDK and returns the information. Sure, here they are. Okay, and then the server, in this case Cloud Function from Firebase, takes that information, and you can do a step in the middle in which you format the information, checks for anything that you don't have to send to the client, anything you want. You can do a lot of things between the client and the database if you are using this model right here. Okay, so if everything checks out, for example, if the user has the permission and everything in the information is correct, the server returns the information to the client. Okay? This is one model. The other one, I'm going to put it right here at the top. The other one uh, just don't use the server. It uses the database, right? But of course, it has a middle layer in between, which is the Firebase secure rule. Sorry, how do you say it? This Firebase security rules. Sorry. So we have these two models right here. Let's do that in AppHive to show you what are the difference between them, right? Get me the restaurants. And here will be another one. Sure. Okay, those are the two models. We are going to be ignoring the security rules for now in this live stream in particular, but we are going to check them out later. Okay, in this one right here, I'm going to be doing a function in between the client and the database. Right, let's do that. So in order to do that, I'm going to be using a new application that I have here. Okay, a project that I already have. This is one project, but I'm going to be creating a new application. This application is going to be Showcase DB, sorry. DB is in Spanish, is DB. And here I'm going to be adding a new page. When you run this page, you can click here and launch. You are running this on the client. This is a client, remember, a client could be an application in your phone or in your browser. The browser could be in any kind of computer. So here we are. This is our client. And any code that I run on the client is going to be running here in my browser. What do I mean by that? If I add a button right here by dragging it, I can add a button right here, and I can add here an event. Let's add an onPress. So any function that I put right here is going to be executed when I press the button. Remember that. So here, let's search for a function. In this case, it's going to be called debug log, right? And let's put here some message. Hello there. This message is going to be printed each time I press the button. Remember that is something that I already did in another live stream. So if I click here, you can see each time I press the button, the message is shown in my console right here. The console, you can open the console by pressing F12 in your keyboard. Okay. So now that I have this function runs on the client, right? But I can make this function run on the server. How? If I go to this section right here, you can see the processes. The processes is a list of functions that I can share between a lot of parts of my application. So now let's add here a new process, and I'm going to be calling it example process. So you can think of app processes as custom functions that you can run in any other part of your code, right? And here I'm going to be putting this exact same function, the debug log. To do that, let's press this button right here to copy it. Let's open again the editor of my app process and paste it right here. There you go. Now I have an app process that when I call it, it will call the debug log function. To make sure that this is correct, let's remove the original function from here and let's call the app process like that. What is different from this one to the other one that I did when I call directly the debug log is that now I have a function that is going to be shared between another parts of my applications. For example, I can put another button, and in this button I can call exactly the same function from here. Yeah. And if I make changes to this function, they are going to be reflected in this and in this button. Okay. So for now, I'm going to call this app process, and you can actually open the app process from here. So you can edit it right there without going to the list right here in your right. So let's open it. And here we only have a debug log. If I test this, let's refresh the page to make sure everything is up to date. If I click the button, it's still exactly the same, only a debug log. Okay. The difference is that now I have a switch here to change the function from running on the client or in the cloud. The cloud is what I call the server right here, cloud functions. So now I have to run it. I want to run it on cloud, but in order to run it on cloud, I need to put a callback in this process. I'm going to return it to client. I'm running this on the client, right? But I need a mechanism from which I can tell the user of this app process when this app process finish. For example, if I have something here that is not immediately done, for example, saving to a database, connecting to any other server, I need a mechanism to tell the user of this function that this function is already done. To do that, we have here the callbacks. The callbacks are functions that I run inside this app process in order for the system to know when the function is completed. So let's call this done. Sorry. So I want to call this callback when the function finishes. In order to do that, let's add the function right here, like any other function. There you go, callback dot on done. So now when I execute this function, I can know when it is done. And when the function is done, I can run any other code. For example, let's run here another debug log. And here let's put a function that is called, sorry, not a function. Let's put a message there. The app process was finished. Okay, so now when I run this, let's again refresh, and I press the button, you can see here the first message. This hello there is executed from inside the app process, and this one right here, the app process was finished, is executed as soon as the app process is completed. Okay, so now I can change this function to run on cloud, and a lot of things are going to be happening when I change this function to on cloud. The first one is that when I press the button, the code inside the app process is not going to be executed. Instead, I'm going to be doing a request to the Firebase Cloud Functions server to execute the code. When the request gets to the Cloud Functions in Firebase, the Cloud Functions will execute the code, and when this callback is called, the response, which is this value right here, which right now is an empty value, it's going to be returned from that request to the client. Okay? Let's check it out. If I press the button right here, you can see the console log, the debug log, sorry, that says hello there doesn't appear here in my console. The only one that shows up is the one that is printed after the function is completed. Let's do that again. Click, nothing happens, and after the function returns, you can see here the app process was finished. If I use my network tab in my development tools and clean everything and click here, you can see here a request to app process that takes the information from my project and runs the and requests Firebase Cloud Functions to execute the code and returns the value. That's the difference. If I return this one to be a client app process, I can click on it and everything is run on the client. That is the difference between this one and this one. This one, which is the mode that I have already put it right here without the switch turn it on. This mode right here is going to run everything on the client. If I press in the switch right there, now it's going to be running like that. Ignore the part about the database. We are not using the database right now. We are only executing arbitrary code in any part of that. But you could ask me, okay, but I want to know if actually the code was run on the server, right? Because, okay, yeah, there is a request right there and everything seems to work. I get the message at the end of the app process, but how do I know this debug log right here? It's called. You can check any debug log in any platform from here. If you go to your left and click on this function, which is the functions list, you can go here to logs. In the logs section, you can see the logs from all the parts of your application in development. So for example, here I have the platform which is web, and I have here the preview. And you can see right here that I have one from the cloud. If I open my console right here in my editor with F12 and clean everything up and click on this, you can see the message that was printed from the web. The process app was finished. But if I click on this one, you can see the hello there. The hello there was executed on cloud, as I can see right here in the application. It doesn't execute on the client, but I can still check out what was printed on the server by clicking on this. Okay. The next step in my example is to actually check something out from the database. If I open here my database editor and add a new collection just for this example, let's put here users db demo. Sorry, is not if it is not in the correct order, I don't know. So here I'm going to be storing users, and each one of my users is going to have a name. Okay. If I click this button right here, view data, I can see a table below, and I can add records right here in my interface. Okay, so let's add one, Jorge. There you go. I have two names, Jorge and Luis. So let's add another one, sorry. Another one that is going to be called Luis. I have two users, right? So now let's query those users. How? In my example process, before I do the callback done, let's add a new function called database. Vamos a, sorry, again in Spanish, but let's search for the function using the search bar. And here you can see the get database data. Let's put this one by dragging it right on top of the callback. Let's remove the debug log. We are not going to be using the debug log anymore for inside the app process. So now let's open this one, and you can select here the path from which you want to query the data. In our case, we need to return all of our user DB demo. Okay, so just click on this. You can see the path right here at the top. Let's close it. And now I have a function that is going to be calling, querying from the database, real-time database of this project. And when it is finished, I want to return that data in my app process. So if I put this one here, this callback done in the data obtained, I can select the information that is returned from the database by going through here and here, get database data. And now this app process will return the data that it queries from the database and return it right here. Yeah? I'm going to turn off the on cloud switch. Everything is running on the client. So we are running the example that is right here, right? Everything is running on the client, and the client is the one that queries the database. Okay. So now if I run this, let's refresh this page and click on this. You can see I get the debug log that it's outside my app process, but I didn't log the information. So let's do that. Let's return here to the calling of my app process. And instead of doing a debug log with this message, let's debug log the information that is returned to me from this example process, which I can do right here, exactly the same way I did with the get database. So now let's run this again. And you can see right here that I indeed get my users when I run this app process. But I want to do something different now. I want to run this on the cloud. So let's turn that on and click on this. Okay, there you go. I can still get the users in my client. Here they are. The difference is that now my users are passing through through the server instead of going directly from the database in Firebase to my client. As I told you in the beginning of this, there are trade-offs to this. For example, if you do this one right here, it's going to be quicker. Okay, I'm going to be putting a huge quotes between quicker, because it's going to be quicker if you only do one query. If you do multiple queries, you have to do them one after the other in Firebase. You can do them at the same time all, but they are going to be merged in some way before you show them in your application. I don't recommend that. It's better to get everything that you need in one after the other. And remember, if your database matches your UI, you don't have to do a lot of queries. That's true. That's correct. So you can do this when you are querying data from Firebase, given that you give real-time database the correct security rules. Yeah, that is totally fine. There is no problem with that. But in this one, it's a little bit slower, of course, because you have to pass from the cloud functions. The difference is that now you are guaranteed to do all the process right here. If you have something after or before you get the data, if you run it on the cloud, it doesn't matter what happens to the phone. The request is already made. Everything is going to be running. In this case, that's not longer true. If you run this one and the phone dies in the middle of doing the process is going to be corrupted. It's going to be lost in the middle of it. Yeah. Here that doesn't happen because you are running on a secure environment on a cloud functions. The problem is that is a little bit more slower because your data goes through three different entities: your client, your server, and real-time database. Yeah. But other advantage that this one has is that you can do formatting here on the cloud without the client even noticing or even having any control over it. Remember, all the code that you run on your client, it belongs to the client, not to you. The client can do whatever it wants with the code you give him in the client. It doesn't matter that your application is compiled, that your application has obfuscation, whatever it has. At the end of the day, the code that you run on the client is your client's code. It can do whatever it wants with it, which is not really a problem if you take that into account when you are designing your application. Yeah. On the other hand, the code that you are running on the server is your code because it's your server. Okay, it's not your server, it's the server from Firebase, but at the end of the day, you are paying Firebase to use that server, and you have complete control over what information is shown on that server, right? You can check the information right here on the database to hide wherever you want before you show it to the client. That is not actually very easy to do with the security rules. You can do that. It is not that easy to do. It's better to do that in this way. And if you are paying something, it is totally possible to do that in this fashion. But I do not recommend it. I prefer you to use this one because it's a little bit more easier, especially you're a beginner. You don't want to complicate your logic even more. You can say, but I am complicating my logic already, right? Because I am adding another layer on top of these ones. This looks simpler. This doesn't look bad at all. It looks manageable. But the difference with this one is that this one is going to lead you to a lot of mistakes that are going to be a little bit more difficult to debug in the future. Like I tell you, if you interrupt a process in the middle of it, you have to take into account that in your design of the code, which is not the case right here. Yeah, you add another layer which is called call functions, but you can work under the assumption that all the code is going to be run it right here. Okay, so just take that into account. This is the first one. Remember, I am going to giving you a little bit more of the basics on how to design applications. This one is the architecture of the server client. Any client could be a server to other clients, and any server could be a client to other server, right? I am giving you this information because this is going to be very relevant when we start developing applications using real-time database from Firebase, right? Another question that I already answered the question that if you want to use any other database, you can do it. You can use your custom backend if you have a custom backend and you only want your client, your UI or your front end it is called the front end. The front end of your application is what the user actually sees on the screen. If you only want to do the front end and you already have a server, you can do that on App5. In fact, App5 is ideal to those cases because all your logic is already taken care of in your server. You only need to connect it to your client, and your client is just a layer in which you show the client what you have on your server. We are going to be seeing a lot of that in the future. But for now, let's leave it on that. Please let me your questions if you have any. Remember, these live streams are not only to teach you how to use AppHive. There are actually how to develop applications from the ground up. So we are going to be talking about architecture a lot because I want to share with you the knowledge that I already acquired in how to develop applications. I'm going to be making mistakes, of course. If you spot one, please let me know in the comments, and I can address them. Right. So for now, thank you for being here, and I see you in the next one. Have a great one.